You're listening to The South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast by Ohio State fans for Ohio State fans on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and SoundCloud. Welcome back to The South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast by Ohio State fans for Ohio State fans from the West Coast. I'm your host, Zach Moore. It's Thursday, November 17th, and this evening I'm very happy to be joined once again by fellow South Stands contributor Paige Van Horn from Denver. PBH, how's it going, my friend?
It's going great, buddy. How are you?
Doing well. As Chad said before we started recording, I'm starting to get nerved up myself for this Michigan game. And one more test to go, but I'm already starting to get nervous for Michigan. We are also joined, of course, by fellow contributor Chad Plummer from Cleveland CP. What's the word from the 216?
What's up, guys? How are you?
Good.
So I wasn't here last week, but I did enjoy listening to you two.
Dude, I got $50 as you didn't listen to that.
Oh, shit. And I, as well, Z, am, I'm getting all nerved up already, and I don't like it. So.
Yeah, that's the way it's supposed to be, right? It's what makes the rivalry special. You get nervous a week early. You talk about it, half the year, and so. But we are first and foremost here to have a look at number 2 Ohio State's visit to College Park this coming Saturday to take on the Maryland Terrapins. The game is a 3:30 p.m. Eastern kick on ABC. And PVH, by the way, you got to like the timing there, my friend, I assume.
Thank the good Lord. Fine.
The line
out of the 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock purgatory.
Oh, God. Well, we go right back to the 9 o'clock window. Well, 9 o'clock Pacific, noon Eastern next week, but we'll be wide awake for that one for sure. The line is Ohio State minus 27.5 this Saturday against Maryland. The over-under is 64. The Buckeyes lead the all-time series between these two schools 7-0. That includes a 66-17 blowout of the Terps last season in Columbus. The last time they played in College Park, though, was all the way back in 2018 because, guys, if you remember, in 2020, they were supposed to play there and the game was canceled because of COVID. Of course, we remember the 2018 disaster, right? Ohio State narrowly escaped with the win, 52-51 in overtime. Maryland failed to convert on a 2-point conversion. If memory serves, that guy was open in the end zone, and their quarterback just threw it in the turf.
It hit him in the numbers, right?
I thought he threw it in the turf for three. I think maybe Tough Borland was in the passing lane or something, but Ohio State was very fortunate that Maryland didn't convert because that looked like a pretty easy pitch and catch. Oh my God, yeah, that was the Greg Schiano defense of 2018. Very forgettable season from a defensive perspective. So that's the last time that that Ohio State visited College Park. That's our last memory of those two teams playing there, and Ohio State was, of course, very lucky to escape by the skin of their teeth. Now, Maryland comes into this contest on Saturday at a pretty respectable 6-4, but they've lost their last two. The Terps were 30-0 losers to Penn State last Saturday in Happy Valley. The week before, Wisconsin beat the Terps 23-10 in Madison. Now, the Terps, you look at the stats, they just look like an average team. They rank 63rd nationally in total offense. They're 55th in offensive yards per play. They're 54th nationally in passing offense. Now interestingly, Talia Tagovailoa was putting up some really good numbers before suffering a knee injury on October 15th against Indiana. The injury kept Tagovailoa out of Maryland's next game against Northwestern. They had a bye, so he had a little time to rest. And then he came back against Wisconsin a couple weeks ago. And since he's returned, it's been a struggle. He's a shell of himself. Against both Wisconsin and Penn State, he threw under 80 yards in both games. He was 10-23 for 77 yards, passing a touchdown and a pick against the Badgers. And then last Saturday against Penn State, he threw for 74 yards on 22 pass attempts and no touchdown. So he's clearly not the same quarterback he was before the injury. And Maryland has some other guys, and I think we can always say this about Maryland, right, guys? They always do have some good skill guys. And they have a good receiver in Raheem Jarrett. He was a player that Ohio State wanted. His numbers this year are kind of pedestrian, only 406 receiving yards on 37 receptions and 3 touchdown grabs. And the Terps have a decent running game. They're 65th nationally in rushing offense, and they have a pretty solid back in Roman Hemby. Hemby averages about 6 yards a carry, so he's a solid back. He's decent. The guy can do some things. Now, on the other side of the ball, the Terps are 73rd nationally in total defense, but a pretty respectable 34th in defensive yards per play. They're 76th against the pass. They're 68th against the run. So again, statistically, we're looking at a pretty like an average football team if we're looking at it from a national view. And I think you could probably even call them an above average team with a healthy Tagovailoa. But, I don't think that's what we're going to see on Saturday. Now, certainly this is not an opponent Ohio State fans should have to worry too much about unless the Buckeyes sleepwalk through the first quarter as they did against Northwestern and or get caught, looking ahead to the Wolverines, that old cliche. I think Maryland is probably good enough to make this game uncomfortable if that happens. So that's the skinny on Maryland. PVH, I want to start with you. What are you going to be watching for in this game on Saturday?
Well, for both Ohio State and Michigan, right? It's the quintessential look ahead.
Yes, indeed.
And so I'm a little nervous for this. I don't know why. It's probably unfounded. And I read about Tagovailoa's knee, and injuries are part of the game. Clearly, he's not the player that he was. I was surprised they got beat as badly as they did by Penn State.
Yeah,
I'm wondering, is Penn State better than we thought? The weather looks fine. I checked that out. I'm totally checking that. In fact, I just looked at the 10-day forecast for Columbus for next Saturday.
Right on, bro.
Completely ludicrous. But yeah, I don't think there's too much to be concerned about. I think if Ohio State, doesn't sleepwalk into this game, thank God it's not at, noon.
Right.
They should easily walk in there, take care of business. Again, I'm on the fence about, okay, what am I looking for? Okay, let's get some offensive line dominance and run the ball.
Right.
I don't know. I'm also thinking maybe, if Trey isn't quite there yet, then don't play him.
I agree with that.
So just, we should have enough offensive firepower to get the job done. Don't want it to be close, but I think, it's a fine balance between resting guys and making sure you're at full strength for Michigan versus, coming in here and, making sure this game isn't close. It shouldn't be close either way. But, other than that, it's really just, the precursor to next week. I mean, that's the way it is. And it's awesome that Michigan's at the place that they're at, and they're in pretty much the same position. So all the same concerns if you were a Michigan fan.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I'm at. It's hard not to project forward beyond this game. And the funny part is, if Day doesn't say that, like probably 75 times, or had said that this week 75 times to his team, still doesn't mean that it couldn't possibly happen, right? Like the players, they're human too, and they're thinking the same thing we're thinking as fans.
Mm-hmm.
So just take them out early. That would be just awesome. Take them out early and coast to a nice W, and then let's move on to Michigan.
All right. CP, what are you going to be looking for in this game on Saturday?
Let's look sharp. Like I want the offensive line making holes for whether it's Mayan, whether it's, Dallas, whoever it may be.
Xavier.
Xavier Johnson. Baby.
Xavier Johnson, my guy. Yeah,
exactly. What a story, man. I mean, for real, that's good stuff. It's the defense. I think there are some things that need to, our defensive backs, they perplex me sometimes.
Well, our corners do. We're very good at safety. I mean, we got like all American level players at safety, but you're right. The corners have been a question mark for most of the season, to be sure.
So, I mean, I'd like to see them not give them a ton of big plays next or Saturday. I'd just like to see that a little bit sharper on the offensive line. Just getting as one unit. I mean, I don't want to look ahead to next week, but quite frankly, we got beat in the trenches last year, and that's that shit needs to be on point for next week. And I think this is get the shit together this weekend. Let's don't want to look ahead, but you know what I mean. We need to be that offensive line and defensive line next week is needed. That's where we got beat last year. So
I'm going to be looking for who's going to tote the rock for the Buckeyes in the run game.
Right.
I mean, I'm expecting they'll be without Mayan Williams. I mean, I would be stunned if he plays. And I think they could potentially be without Trey Henderson too. I don't know for sure. It's just a guess. So we might get our first real glimpse of Chip Trayanum at running back against Maryland. We'll see. Now, Ryan Day said in his press conference earlier this week that he expects two of those three, Williams, Henderson, and Trayanum, to be available. I'm using that word in air quotes, available. So I'm not sure what available means exactly. Available doesn't necessarily mean that they're actually going to play. I have a feeling it's probably going to be running back by committee with Dallin Hayden, Chip Trayanum, and maybe a sprinkling of my guy, Xavier Johnson. I'd love to see that. So that's what I'm going to be watching. And I'm going to be watching, especially if they have to play more reserves at running back. I want to see how they do because, you know, I've got an eye on Michigan, of course. On defense, I want to see the Buckeyes tackle well. I think they got a little loose with some of the tackling against both Penn State and Northwestern. 14 missed tackles against Penn State, 15 missed tackles against Northwestern. That was a season high. Now, they were much better against the Hoosiers last Saturday, only 5 missed tackles. They're facing a pretty good back, as I said, in Roman Hemby. I'd like to see the Ohio State defense use Hemby as kind of a tune-up for Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. I think that's going to be a huge key against Michigan next Saturday or on the 26th. That's, you know, always going to be a big key to beating any team in tackle football, of course, but most especially Michigan. Don't let Corum or Edwards pop any long runs. And, you know, the same goes for this Saturday with Hemby. You got to make them earn it, especially Michigan. Make them convert in the red zone. They're not very good at converting touchdowns in the red zone. So I'm already looking ahead to Michigan, guys. I can't even help myself. So that's what I'm going to be looking for defensively. Ohio State now, they're a much better tackling defense than they were a year ago. In 2021, the Buckeyes finished with a tackling grade of 64.2, according to PFF. Through 10 games this season, that tackling grade is all the way up to 81.1. So that's more, you know, what you would expect out of a silver bullet defense. Finally, I want to see Julian Fleming get off the schneid. I think he's in a little bit of a late season slump, a little bit of a funk. He dropped several balls against Northwestern. Now, granted, you know, the weather conditions were an issue, but he dropped what should have been a touchdown against the Hoosiers. I don't know if you guys remember that play. So he seems like he's in a little bit of a funk. I'm hoping to see him play his way out of that. We're going to need Fleming against Michigan. Paige, let me kick this back to you. Any other things that you'll be looking for in this matchup with Maryland?
Well, yeah, you brought up tackling, and it reminded me of a couple missed tackles that Eichenberg.
Yeah, it's Penn State. Yeah,
against Penn State. Yeah, and I felt like he might have had one against Indiana. But then did I see something that he's hurt?
So yeah, I our friends at the Buckeye Talk podcast were talking about Eichenberg. He in pregame warmups, he had like a cast of some kind of a on one of his arms, and I guess he's nursing some kind of a hand or finger issue, as I understand it. And I think it might have been Bill Landis of Rivals who said that he thought perhaps, you know, if you got a hand or something wrong with your finger, it's difficult to completely wrap up and do that kind of roll tackling, right? Where you hit the ball carrier and then kind of roll and bring him down. It's hard to hang on to the ball carrier if you can't get a complete, you know, a good grip with one of your hands. So that may have explained the couple of big missed tackles he had against Penn State, which you pointed out. He looked much better against Indiana, though. Only 5 missed tackles last week for the Buckeyes against Indiana, according to PFF.
You know who I think had a pretty good game last week that I've been looking for? That it was Jack Sawyer, number 33.
Sawyer was good.
He totally did.
Great game last week.
Yeah, he had a couple of, I think he was credited with 1.5 sacks. To me, it looked like he got, you know, he should have been credited just for 2 full sacks.
Right.
I don't know. The last one where he came in I think he did a little stunt and came in from the outside in and just threw their quarterback like a rag doll. But then he had another sack at the end of the first half where he depleted that quarterback. And I think that's the one where he only got a half a sack. I'm like, how did he only get a half a sack for that one? I mean, that was all him as far as I could tell.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was good. You know, Jim Knowles said something interesting earlier this week in interviews with the media. He said he'd like to see Jack Sawyer play a little more recklessly than he does. He wants to see him play a little bit more with his hair on fire. Maybe he's a little too controlled, maybe too measured. I thought that was an interesting observation. Sorry, PBH, you were going to say something?
No. That now that you say that, Z, that makes like so much sense, because like I was thinking like, like in that Northwestern game, I'm like, what? Like it was like he was like clueless, like he was like almost like a robot, and then he was overrunning like tackles. I'm like, what the fuck are you doing, dude? And last weekend he kind of looked more like kind of what you're referencing there, like dude, that's just get after it, bro.
It was nice to see him. It was definitely a get right game. I mean, Indiana stinks, but it was good to see Ohio State not dick around, right, with Indiana as they did with Northwestern the week before. Sorry, PVH, were you going to say something?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, it's just kind of like reading the tea leaves, with the running back situation. It's astonishing. Like if you think about it, you got JSN, so really don't know how bad that injury is. Trey, we really don't know how bad that injury is. The other guy that has been MIA is Mike Hall, who was just wrecking offenses. And so like it is somewhat. I mean, those are three. They're superstars for our team. And we really don't know, what their status is, how banged up are they? And so, what do they do with the running game? And if, I don't know, like I'm kind of like weirdly okay with an Xavier Johnson, Dallin Hayden rushing attack from here on out, because it just kind of sets the script for like, hey, you never saw this coming. Those guys are ripping off, Xavier Johnson's 70-yard touchdown last
71 yards. Insane. It was the longest run. It was the longest run from scrimmage for Ohio State this year.
Right. And he pulls in that catch against Notre Dame, and it's just like, you could have said, I'll give you 5,000 guesses to start to see. I didn't even know who the guy was. Right.
Yeah. 174 all-purpose yards for Johnson against Indiana on Saturday. Sorry, go ahead, PBH.
So it's like just these quirky storylines that I don't know. I've just got this witchy feeling that maybe those two guys, Hayden and Johnson, play just a gigantic role in these next two games.
They could.
Much more so against Michigan. I think it's pretty interesting.
I mean, I would certainly like to have Mayan and Trey back for sure. Who wouldn't? But I said this in the postgame pod. I think the tip of the spear for Ohio State is its passing game and its defense. And if we go back to, there's been all this consternation and hand-wringing about Ohio State in short yardage situations. Admittedly, they've not been great. And of course, it brings up memories of that 3rd and 2 in the third quarter against Michigan, when in Ohio State's first possession of the second half that they did not convert on. But that's not why Ohio State lost that game. They lost that game because they couldn't tackle Hassan Haskins. He went Tim Biaka-Batuka on that defense. And then they gave up 31 pressures to the Michigan defensive front. So to Hutchinson, Ojabo, and those guys, I mean, that's really, in my opinion, why Ohio State lost that game. Now, I'm not going to write off the running attack as unimportant. Of course, you've got to be able to run the ball. Conventional logic dictates that you do have to be able to run. You have to be a threat. I think they can be I agree with you, PBH. I think they can be a decent threat running the ball with Hayden, potentially train him, and a little sprinkling of Xavier Johnson. If it comes to that, hopefully it won't. Hopefully Trey Henderson will be able to give them something on the 26th. CP, anything else you'd like to mention before we move to our concernometer scores?
No, I think covered it all, man.
Okay, buddy. Well, let me start with you. Why don't you give me your concernometer readout for the Terps?
Well, I'm going to go to 1.75.
1.75.
That's decimal points.
I wanted to say,
like, have a fraction for Michigan. You're gonna have a fraction concern over it.
I was gonna just put it at a flat line it, but that seems to not being working out for the kid.
So you're confident. You're confident. 1.75.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. And PVH, how about you? Give us your readout. You mentioned earlier in the pod that you're a little nervous about this one. So what's your score?
I'm a solid 5.5. I just think you need to be. I just they can be dangerous. If Tua's knee's not healthy, or I don't know, Tua. It's
Talia. Talia. Yeah, Tua's his brother. Yeah.
Talia.
Yeah, and I would say, what did I say? 5.5. Three of it is because I'm just already nervous about Michigan.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's a combined concernometer, just freaking the hell out, right? Like it's where I'm at, basically.
That makes sense. I mean, that makes sense because, there is the old cliche looking ahead element that could that could have a role here in the outcome. I'm at 3.5. And maybe this is a bad sign. I'm coming in lower than you, PVH, again, but it was a bad omen against Northwestern, right? I think it was lower than both of you guys. Ohio State's on the road, week before Michigan. Maryland has a few dudes. Buckeyes are a little banged up, especially at running back. Not out of the realm of possibility. This could be a game for a couple of quarters. I think the Buckeyes are on a mission this season, though. I mean, if someone's going to get them, I have a hard time seeing that it happens in this game. And I do think the Tagovailoa injury is pretty huge for Maryland. I mean, the bottom has kind of dropped out of that offense since his injury. So I would probably have a higher readout on my concernometer if Tagovailoa were healthy, but for me, it's 3.5. All right, let's hit some score predictions. PVH, I'm going to kick this back to you. Give me your score prediction.
I'm going to go with 51-14, so I'm not that concerned.
5.5.
51-14. Okay, and that
I told you 3 of that was. I'm just already amped up for Michigan. So
I got you, dude. I like how you roll, bro.
I mean, that sounds like a composite score from this series, right? I mean, 51-14. I'll bet if we looked at, we added up the totals from the last 7 games, that would probably be the average score of this game. How about you, CP?
Well, I got to obviously stay in the high 50s, but I was thinking about even going up to like 63.
Whoa.
I'm thinking they're going to want to just unleash the hound. But you know what? I'm actually going to go 57-10.
57-10. Okay, I like it. I got Ohio State 49, Maryland 14. I could see it being a bigger beating than that. But, again, I mentioned it, that the Tagovailoa injury just seems to have been a game changer for Maryland. The bottom of that offense has kind of dropped out, I think. So, Michigan, Illinois. Want to spend a little time on this one. It's a 9 a.m. kick in the Big House. The game will be broadcast on ABC. So for Ohio State fans, for your convenience, Michigan, Illinois on ABC, 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 Eastern, followed immediately by Ohio State and Maryland. The line is Michigan minus 18. The over-under is 40.5. Now, if Illinois running back Chase Brown is able to play in this game, he was injured last week in the loss to Purdue. This game will feature the Big Ten's 2 leading rushers. Brown leads the Big Ten and the country in rushing yards with 1,442. Blake Corum is second in the Big Ten and 4th nationally with 1,349 yards rushing. Brown and Corum are also among the country's leaders in attempts, naturally. Brown actually leads the country with 280 carries. Wow. And Corum is 7th nationally with 227 carries. So 2 very high usage backs. Now, after a 7-1 start, Illinois has come back down to earth after losing their last 2 to Michigan State and Purdue. Both of those games were in Champaign. I mean, I thought we were headed for actually a really, really intriguing matchup in this game. There's still a ton of interest for me, but Illinois, not sure what happened these last 2 weeks against Michigan State and Purdue, but the Illini defense is still playing really well, and that's what intrigues me about this matchup, guys. Illinois is 2nd nationally in total defense. They're 3rd in defensive yards per play. They're 6th nationally against the run, and they're 5th in opponent rushing yards per attempt. I think Michigan's going to win this game, and probably by a comfortable margin in the end. I just don't think Illinois has enough offense to be a real threat to beat the Wolverines, especially if Chase Brown is limited or can't play. But I do think this Illinois defense might be good enough to slow the Michigan run game down. And if that happens, I will be very curious to see what J.J. McCarthy does in this game. So that's my initial take on this game. PVH, I'm going to kick this to you. Give me some thoughts on the Michigan-Illinois matchup.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And I was I thought that over under was a little light. And I was like,
40 and a half.
I do think Michigan. Yeah. I think Michigan's going to win this game. It's supposed to be breezy as hell, right? Like sustained, 20-mile-an-hour winds. And so, if you're Illinois, right, are you not putting 9-10 guys in the box and make McCarthy beat you?
Absolutely.
Especially in those conditions, right? Like,
yeah.
And so I think, it could be a little dicey. It helps us none for Illinois to win this game, right?
Of course
they're in
not.
the West.
Right.
So if Michigan beats us, they're still going to go to the championship game. So it's going to be, that weird dynamic, right? Where you're just watching this game. And I have a sneaking suspicion that it could be a little tight and you find yourself rooting for Illinois when
I can't help it. I know.
You just can't help yourself, right?
Can't help it. Yeah. A real quick stat on JJ McCarthy. His last 2 games against Nebraska and Rutgers, under 50% completion percentage in both of those games. Last week against Nebraska, he was 8 of 17 for 129 yards. That's a 47% completion percentage. He did manage to throw 2 touchdowns. And then against Rutgers, 13 of 27 for 151 yards. McCarthy, 5 of his last 6 games, he's been well under 200 yards passing. CP, let me kick this to you. How do you see this game between Michigan and Illinois?
I think it's going to be a little tight for about the first 2.5 quarters. And then I feel like Michigan wears them down, but I think like Bielema is going to have this, Illinois charged up, ready to go. And then, you alluded to the point about the running back. Hopefully he gets back. I mean, I'd like, obviously we don't want to, I'd like to get Michigan a little beat up, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like defensive, like the Fighting Illini, they're pretty solid. So maybe they could get a couple dings in there on the,
it's going to be a physical
JJ.
game.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think there's any question about it. It's going to be a physical game. So what would you set the over under on total rushing attempts? That's total for both teams. Where would you set the over under on that? Total rushing attempts combined for both teams.
Wow.
Are we talking 100?
I was going to
maybe there won't be that many possessions. I don't know.
I was going to say probably between 85 and 100, I would think. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah. I mean, these are almost kind of like the exact same team. Just right. Michigan has better players, but other than that,
100%.
I mean, it's the exact same team. I as far as I can tell. I don't know, PVH. How about you? What do you think? What's the over under?
No, that's a great point. Yeah, it's clearly, and again, I think it's going to be pretty windy there, so they're not going to try and pass the ball. I wonder, can you actually bet that? Can you check that out?
I'm sure
on the BDB
on FanDuel or something. I'm sure you can bet that.
I'll call my guy at the BDB.
Yeah, I'm sure you can bet that.
Get the over under on that.
I'll get the 4-1-1 on that shit.
80 for sure. But I'm with you, CP. Probably in the neighborhood of 85, maybe 90 total rushing attempts in this game.
Who wins the West?
What a clusterfuck the West.
Purdue and Iowa. It's so ridiculous. I mean, I think there's 5 teams that still legitimately have a chance, I guess.
Really?
It's a total clusterfuck. And as it is every year.
With these divisions.
Yeah. That too. So, that's another discussion. I agree. Now, if they did do away with these divisions, I mean, we're basically talking about it'd be done. It'd be a done deal. We'd be talking about back-to-back Ohio State, Michigan games. They'd play in Columbus, and then they would play the next week in Indianapolis. So, and that's coming soon, right? They're going to get away. They're going to do away with these divisions. So that is a very real possibility.
Crazy to think about.
So, or let me ask you guys about that while we're on the topic. CP, would you like that? Would you like to see back-to-back Ohio State Michigan games? Is it too much of a good thing? What do you think?
I mean, you know what? I don't know if it's too much of a good thing. I know it's not good for my heart or my mind,
right.
But I mean, that's a physical ass football game.
Neither is cocaine, Chad.
That is a physical ass football game. I mean, you know what I mean? The shit is on the wall. When they come in, they're, over the summer. So I mean, it's not. So we're talking about like getting up for that game and then turning around and like playing it again the next week. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's nuts.
Well, I think what you could see is you have Ohio State, Michigan, a scenario which a very realistic scenario, which we are bound to see multiple times as soon as they do away with these divisions. You know, Ohio State and Michigan have already locked up their trip to Indianapolis, and the game that you have to really win is the Big Ten title game, right?
Right.
So then you start seeing, you know, the game that's hosted either in Columbus or in Ann Arbor. You see maybe you have the coaches resting players, maybe saving things for the Big Ten title game. So I don't, PBH, how do you feel about it? Would you embrace it? What do you think?
Well, like anything, there's good and bad to it. It doesn't really matter what any of us think it's going to happen.
Right.
You know,
I mean, we'd rather see Ohio State, Michigan 2.0. Last year, we would rather seen Ohio State, Michigan 2.0, especially for an Ohio State fan, than fucking Michigan just boat racing Iowa, right?
Snore.
Yeah, and the other dumb thing is, like, when they ever created these divisions, like, did not anybody look at the last 100 years of Big Ten football?
I was like, what the fuck, man?
And it, like, really, like, why on God's green earth would you set it up this way? And, you know, it's just,
well, they didn't initially, right? They put Ohio State and Michigan in opposite divisions when it was leaders and legends. And then when they went to East and West, they put Michigan and Ohio State into the same, I know, in the same division.
You know what? You could have them in different divisions, and you could also honor the fact that the last game of the year, Ohio State is going to play Michigan, regardless, right?
Like,
Are there rules here? Like, there's
they can do whatever they want.
You can do whatever.
This is Nam. There's no rules.
There's no rules here, Johnny.
So they are going to get it right eventually. They are going to. They are going to get rid of divisions. And, you know, you got USC and UCLA joining the Big Ten in a couple of years. And maybe it isn't necessarily a foregone conclusion that it's going to be Ohio State and Michigan in the, you know, back to back at the end of it. You know, with USC joining, you know, you got Lincoln Riley there. He turns it around. USC is going to have something to say about that. Probably even UCLA if Chip Kelly stays there. But for the sake of the discussion, it would be something. I mean, last year, after the way we played in Ann Arbor, I would have loved another shot at Michigan in the Big Ten title game. And it was just torture having to sit there and watch that Big Ten title game in Iowa. You know,
so bad.
Get a participation trophy for getting their asses kicked by Michigan.
Well, I think this is a byproduct of Ohio State morphing into, you know, 2020 sort of program built to win, speed, right?
Beat the SEC. They're an SEC team in the North.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, you know, you're going to play some games in horrible weather, and that's going to be negated, and that's going to hurt you. And let's just be honest, Michigan hasn't done that, right? They're still playing the same football that Harbaugh, when he was under center for Bo, that is how they play.
Yeah.
And
unapologetically,
totally. And, you know, there's some truth to that, you know, if it's a horribly weathered, you know, snowy, windy day, but that will never equate into a national championship.
No, we saw it last year.
Football.
Not again. I mean, right. No. I mean, not again. You are not going to run through an SEC team in a college football playoff semifinal.
No shot. You're going to get boat race like they did against Georgia.
Yeah, exactly. But the formula that Harbaugh is using, well, that, you know, could get him out of the Big Ten potentially. Now, Ohio State has to, you know, I think they've done some things to address the toughness bit and, you know, the tackling and that sort of thing, which we can talk about next week. So back to the Big Ten West race. It is an unmitigated clusterfuck. You've got four teams at 4-3. Purdue, Illinois, Iowa, and Minnesota all at 4-3. And you even have Wisconsin there lurking. Well, there's only 2 games left in the season. I think Wisconsin's probably eliminated at this stage, but it looks like there's 4 teams that are in it. Now, I don't know all the tiebreakers and who's left to play who and that sort of thing. But yeah, it is kind of a muddled mess of mediocrity in the Big Ten West.
You know, the other thing is you can't just write that game off. So what year was it where we slept walk against Wisconsin?
Yes. You know, a couple times they played us pretty tough. Wisconsin did.
You know, again, it just speaks to the lunacy of how they have these two divisions set up.
Yeah.
But it's not out of the realm of possibility. Coming off of Michigan, huge letdown game, you're banged up, you know, and then all of a sudden you get knocked off by like an Iowa, and then you have no Big Ten representative in the playoff. Like, get your head out of your ass.
Yeah,
Warren, and fix this.
Well, yeah. So if you look at Ohio State's history in the Big Ten title game, there was only one time, the first time or the second time they were in that game, did they win it convincingly in a laugher, and that was Wisconsin in 2014, the 59-0 game. After that, you had Wisconsin play them very tough twice, and Northwestern give them competitive games into the fourth quarter both times.
So let's chat for a second about USC UCLA.
Oh yeah,
over under 75. Like I really think we're rooting for the Chip Kellys in that game, so we can eliminate.
Yeah,
you know,
I think so
USC
too.
Out of the conversation, and I actually think that game's only 2.5 points.
Yeah.
Neither one of them play any defense. That'll be a hell of a game, hopefully.
Yeah, it'd be interesting.
I think we have a definite rooting interest for UCLA in that contest.
I agree. I think we want USC out of the mix. I think we probably want TCU also to lose, right? So Ohio State should, as a safety net, should Ohio State drop, you know, so that should they lose to Michigan, there's still an opportunity that they might be considered as a one-loss team, a non-champ to get in. I'm with you. The only thing with UCLA, because the game, they're technically the home team. They play in the Rose Bowl. I don't know if you guys have been paying attention to the attendance at UCLA games this year, but
yeah,
sucks,
man.
It sucks. Yeah. They need to build a stadium on that campus. I don't know if there's enough interest or enough money, or I don't know if the leadership is interested in that. I mean, I love the Rose Bowl, don't get me wrong, but I mean, how far is that from the UCLA campus? Is that like a 45-minute drive or something?
Yeah,
it's not close.
Like 35, 40 minutes. So
yeah.
Like who's going to want to go, like, you know, they need to set up some party buses or some kind of shit. We should look into that, PBH.
So PBH, there's another reason to root against USC in this game, and that is if you're rooting for CJ Stroud to win the Heisman, then you want Caleb Williams out of the discussion, because that dude's having a season. I don't know if anyone's paying attention.
Yeah, and that's the thing. He's got 31 touchdowns.
Yeah.
I mean, like, to 2 interceptions.
Better stats than CJ Stroud.
He's going to be like on like some like the national TV like the next like 2 to 3 weeks. They got Notre Dame. I think they play. Don't they play UCLA this weekend?
They play UCLA this weekend. That's the game we're talking about. And then they do get Notre Dame. And watch out for Notre Dame.
Are you paying attention, Chad?
Come on, Chad. Wake up, goddammit.
Hey, no, I am paying attention, man, but I wasn't sure. Like, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So you're
thinking about the party.
Oh, you thought we were talking about volleyball.
All those
yeah, they're both very good at volleyball.
Maybe Chad is zoomed in from the party bus for this pod. So to your point, 31 touchdown passes to only 2 INTs. And he's an athlete, man. He can make things happen with his legs. 283 yards rushing as well. He's got 6 rushing touchdowns. He's a scary player, Caleb Williams is. So to your point, PVH, we've got 2 big reasons to be rooting against USC in this game.
Well, I mean, if they win out, right? UCLA, Notre Dame, and then whomever, maybe Utah I mean, dude, they're probably in the playoff. I mean, there's going to be chaos, right? Some teams that we don't think are going to lose are going to lose. Who knows where? But I mean, I looked at their schedule. They have played nobody. It's terrible.
Their defense is awful.
So it's awful. However, but if they win these next 3 games, then
that's a resume. Yeah, that's a resume because you're talking about a win over the committee's. What is it? The number 16. Sorry, I closed out the page for it. Yeah, the committee's number 16. And then wherever Notre Dame is ranked, right? Notre Dame is in the top. I think they're number 18, if I'm not mistaken. And then that would also mean if they went out, probably seeing Utah again. Now, the Pac-12 was smart enough to get rid of their division, so they would be rematched with Utah, who beat them. That's their only loss in a really close game. I don't know, a 2-point conversion, right, in the final seconds to win that game. So they will have a resume when it's all said and done that's compelling for sure. Another game that's interesting here. Number 4 TCU travels to Baylor. The line on that game is only TCU minus 2.5.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy.
That's crazy. And, that's a Texas thing.
To lose badly.
For sure. Yeah, get them out of the way. Yeah, I know Tennessee fans are definitely going to be rooting for Baylor in that game as well. But that's interesting, that line, because Baylor's not that good. They're 6-4.
I was thinking about like jumping on all over Baylor.
Yeah.
What do you think? I mean, come on.
I would think so.
Like, everybody's going to take TCU. Everybody. Vegas is going to clean up this weekend.
That is TCU at Baylor. That is Fox's. Well, that's their noon game. I don't think it's. Well, it might be. Is it Joel Klatt? And it must be, because it's their big noon kick. It's Gus and Joel.
Klatt's doing UCLA, USC.
Oh, that's right. Okay, all right, that's right. Yeah. So TCU Baylor. It's a 9 a.m. kick. That's going to be competing with Illinois, Michigan. I'll definitely be keeping an eye on that one for sure. All right, fellas. Is there anything else you guys want to discuss about either Ohio State or Michigan before we shut things down? PBH?
I have fallen trap to this multiple times this season. And I think I think a lot of the pundits are a little down on Ohio State at this point. And, like, oh, well, they had a bad game or it's like, guess what, guys? Every team has a bad half, right? But no one's really talking that much about, honestly, except us, like how vastly improved our defense is.
Yeah.
Right. And we have been thought of as just such a one-dimensional team for this last
finesse.
Really,
right.
3 to 5 years, and God damn it, our defense can keep us in any game. I firmly believe that. And so
I agree
that is, kind of, I keep reminding myself of that. Like, yeah, you know what? Like, wow, we don't have to score on every single, drive, because our defense is going to get stops, and hell, shit, against Penn State, they literally won us the game. There's a multitude of different ways you can win a game. So I don't know.
Yeah, you're right, Paige. Like you said about that, like, like prior to this, like, you got to score every fucking time you get the ball. And
then we freak out when they don't.
Yeah, we're like, oh God, what are we gonna do now?
Yeah, I think in this question of toughness, right? Because that's been a big off-season theme, and you had, Michigan talking about Ohio State as a finesse team, and it's just been this talking point for all the pundits. I think the Ohio State defense, I agree with you, PVH, is going to settle that toughness question on November 26th. I really do. And what intrigues me about the matchup with Illinois is I think Ohio State, statistically speaking, is right there with Illinois in most of the defensive metrics that people really care about. Only they're executing their defense with way better players. So that's why I'm really intrigued about this game, because I want to see what Illinois can do. Are we going to learn anything about the Michigan offense? I want to know what happens when Blake Corum can't run for 175 yards? What are you, Michigan, after that? I think Ohio State has answers questions about themselves when the chips are down and when the things that they like to do aren't available to them for one reason or another, whether it's injury to Jackson Smith and Jigba, whether it's weather conditions as they were at Northwestern. I'm not sure Michigan has answered that question about themselves yet. Who are you? What can you do when the thing that you like to do best, that you're best at, is taken away or you can't do it as well? I think Ohio State has the ability to take away the Michigan running attack, and then we'll find out.
I'm already starting to freak out, man. I'm starting to freak out.
And I think if anyone's going to settle this toughness question, it's going to be the fucking Ohio State defense. Mark those words.
No one's talking about that, right? Everyone's talking about, our offensive struggles, in a freaking tropical, depression, hurricane, gale force winds. But nobody is really giving any credence to the fact that our defense is vastly improved. And the other last thing I'll say is this: who runs their mouth first? We've already had one from our friend Desmond. I got a C note that says somebody from Michigan. I don't think it's going to be a Buckeye. I think it's going to be somebody from Michigan.
You got that born on third base comment still hanging out there from the post game last year.
See, good fucking point.
Right? So those chickens are going to come home to roost. I really believe that. All right, fellas. Well, listen, thanks so much for making the time. We will reconvene next week, either Wednesday or Thursday, whenever. Well, it can't be Thursday. It's going to be Thanksgiving, but somewhere around that time to discuss, how this Maryland game played out and to look ahead to Michigan. Until then, thanks so much for listening, everyone. Go Bucks. You You've been listening to the South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and visit our website at southstandsosu.com.